Hey everyone, we are working to hit 1,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
Yo, did you just hear that, man? Todd Monken, the offensive coordinator of the Cleveland Browns, is out here on a live microphone telling the entire NFL world that Deshaun Watson wanting to come back and battle is, quote, really cool. Really cool. Like your boy just found out his favorite sneaker colorway dropped. Meanwhile, the rest of us have been watching Deshaun Watson stumble through 6 years of injury, suspension, drama, and underperformance. And Todd Monken is up there talking about him like he just discovered a hidden gem at a garage sale. I'm Dre Fiver. You are locked in to Dre Reports. And today we are going all the way in on the Cleveland Browns wide receiver room, the Deshaun Watson redemption narrative that Todd Monken is apparently trying to sell America, and the very real, very uncomfortable possibility that Jerry Jeudy, a man this franchise paid, is now a WR4 on his own depth chart. Strap in, because Cleveland just handed us a full tabloid front page, and we haven't even seen a preseason snap. Let me set the stage properly, because the situation in Cleveland right now is genuinely one of the most layered stories in the entire NFL this offseason. And if you're treating it like a throwaway depth chart note, you are missing the drama underneath the surface. When the Browns made Casey Consecayo a first-round draft pick and immediately turned around and grabbed Denzel Boston in the second round, the organizational message was not subtle. This front office is investing premium draft capital into the wide receiver room. They are committing real resources to rebuilding the passing game from the ground up around young talent. And when you spend that kind of capital on skill position players, those guys are going to get reps. They are going to get targets. They are going to get every opportunity to justify what the organization spent to bring them in, because the front office's credibility is tied to their development whether the coaches like it or not. That's just the cold business reality of how the NFL works. Front offices draft guys in the top 2 rounds, and those guys play, full stop. So from the jump, Jerry Jeudy is already operating in a complicated environment. He was brought in to be the experienced anchor of this receiver room, the veteran presence who could stabilize things while the young guys developed. But the moment Cleveland used first and second round picks on wide receivers, Judy's role quietly shifted. He went from being the guy to being a guy. And when you go from being the guy to being a guy in an NFL receiver room, the transition can happen fast, and it can get ugly. What nobody saw coming, or at least what wasn't being talked about loudly enough, is that Isaiah Bond was about to turn this whole thing up another level. Because Isaiah Bond has been on an absolute tear at OTAs, and the reports coming out of Cleveland suggest that Todd Monken is not just impressed, he is in full creative mode around this player. Multiple people covering the Browns have noted that Bond has been one of the most consistent standout performers in practice, and the detail that really grabs your attention is that Monken is actively designing offensive packages specifically for Isaiah Bond's skill set. Not generic route trees, not situational depth chart usage, custom-designed packages built around what this specific player can do. That is a different level of investment. That is a coordinator telling you in the clearest possible language, this player has changed how I'm drawing up my offense. And before anybody tries to dismiss that as coaching hype, understand what it actually means coming from Todd Monken specifically. Monken is not a hype man. He is a precision offensive architect who spent years at the University of Georgia building one of the most sophisticated passing attacks in college football history. He doesn't design custom packages for players who aren't genuine weapons. He designs packages for players he sees as structurally exploitable against opposing defenses. When Monken builds something specifically for you, it means he has looked at your skill set and identified a matchup problem that you create for every defense in the league. That is not a compliment. That is a scouting report and a game plan wrapped into one. Isaiah Bond's calling card is speed. Not good speed, not impressive speed for an NFL receiver. We are talking about genuine track meet speed, the kind that forces safeties to play deeper and opens up the middle of the field for everyone else on the offense. He showed you what he could do in the regular season when he made splash plays in a game against the Raiders that got people's attention. But what he is doing at OTAs apparently looks like a completely different version of that player. More refined, more comfortable, more integrated into what Monken is trying to build. The speed was always there. What's new is that the package around it is starting to look dangerous. Dre's personal opinion. I'm saying this clearly, and I want people to remember I said it. If Isaiah Bond comes into this regular season having fully absorbed what Todd Monken is teaching him, the route disciplines, the timing, the leverage techniques, he is going to be one of the most disruptive deep threats in the AFC North. Every single secondary in that division has had trouble with speed over the top at some point in recent memory. Bond is the kind of player who punishes you for even a half second of miscommunication in the back end. Cleveland hasn't had that weapon consistently in years. I'm not crowning him yet, but I am paying close attention, and I think the rest of the league is about to have to do the same. Now here is where we have to have the uncomfortable conversation about Jeudy, because the math is getting brutal for him, and somebody needs to say it out loud. You have Consecayo in the first round. You have Boston in the second round. Both of those guys are going to get every opportunity the organization can give them, because that's how draft capital works in the NFL. You protect your investments by playing your picks. On top of that, you now have Isaiah Bond operating as an offensive coordinator's pet project with custom route trees being drawn up in his honor. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, you have Jeudy, a former first-round pick himself, a player with real talent who has spent his entire career fighting the reputation of never quite living up to his potential, trying to figure out where he fits. The honest answer to where he fits right now is, it's not clear. And that is a massive problem for a receiver who needs consistent opportunities to rebuild his market value and prove that he belongs in the conversation as a legitimate number 1 or number 2 option. Being buried at WR4 on a Browns depth chart is not a career resurrection, it is a career stall. And the longer the OTA reports continue to frame Bond as the hot name and Consecayo and Boston as the featured future, the harder it becomes to paint an optimistic picture for Jeudy's role in this offense. Multiple beat reporters covering the Browns have noted that the depth chart conversation has shifted in ways that feel real rather than speculative. This is not just Jeudy losing a few reps to competition, this is the organizational investment and the OTA narrative both pointing in the same direction, away from him. That is a convergence of signals that a veteran receiver cannot afford to ignore. Now let's pivot to the other enormous story coming out of these OTAs, which is Todd Monken's handling of Deshaun Watson and the absolutely fascinating reaction it is generating from people who have been watching this situation closely. Because Monken gave some media availability recently, and the sound bites were genuinely stunning in terms of their candor in two completely opposite directions. On one end of the spectrum, you have Monken calling out interceptions thrown in 7-on-7 drills as embarrassing. Let's make sure we understand what that means in the context of football practice. 7-on-7 is a controlled environment drill. There is no pass rush. The defensive line is not on the field. The variables are dramatically reduced compared to a live game situation, which means the drill is essentially a pure evaluation of a quarterback's decision-making, timing, and accuracy. When you throw an interception in that context, there is no offensive lineman to blame. There is no pass rusher collapsing the pocket. There is no unexpected blitz to account for. It is a clean read and an accurate throw. Or it isn't. Monken saying that interceptions in that environment are embarrassing is him communicating a standard publicly, and that standard is extremely high. He is not coddling anybody. He is not managing feelings. He is telling you what he expects and making clear that what he has seen is not meeting that bar. That is a fascinating thing to say publicly, and the reason it matters is that it creates context for everything else Monken has said about Watson. Because in the same availability where he set that brutally high standard, he turned around and talked about Watson in language that could not have been more different in tone. Monken spoke about Watson as a man who has had disappointments he couldn't control, who has been through real adversity, who is coming back to battle and trying to change the narrative around himself. He called it cool. He said it multiple times. He is clearly not just talking about football when he talks about Watson. He is talking about the human being, the character, the work ethic, the daily presence in the building. And what the Speakeasy crew correctly identified is that when you combine that level of public praise with the brutal honesty about 7-on-7 interceptions, you get a very complicated message. Either Watson is throwing those interceptions and Monken is still publicly defending him, which raises questions. Or Watson is not the one throwing them, in which case the praise and the criticism exist in entirely separate conversations that are both happening at once. Either way, the public narrative Monken is building around his quarterback is loaded with tension. The Speakeasy conversation broke this down from the right angle, and I want to give them their flowers because they asked the question that needed to be asked: is Todd Monken putting too much pressure on Deshaun Watson by building him up this way? And the answer is genuinely complicated, which is exactly why it's worth exploring at length. Here is the reality about Deshaun Watson that cannot be softened with inspirational language. He has not been a genuinely elite quarterback in 6 years. 6 years. The last time we saw Deshaun Watson perform at the level everyone in Cleveland is hoping to see again was when he was in Houston wearing a Texans uniform, moving around a pocket with fluidity and creativity, and making throws that made you believe he was a top 5 quarterback. That version of Deshaun Watson has not existed since. Between the suspension, the Achilles tear, the re-injury, and the messy organizational dysfunction in Cleveland that left everyone guessing about the quarterback situation every single week, Watson has been, by any objective measure, a negative presence on the field for an extended period of time. That is not a hot take. That is documented reality. So when Todd Monken gets behind a microphone and frames Watson as a comeback story, as a man who wants to battle and change the narrative, he is not just making a motivational speech. He is publicly betting his own credibility as an offensive mind on a quarterback whose ceiling right now is genuinely unknown. If Watson comes back and plays well, even not elite, just functional, somewhere in the range of 3,500 to 4,000 yards with reasonable efficiency, Monken looks like a genius who saw something nobody else could see and coaxed it out of a broken player. That would be one of the great coaching redemption stories of the last decade. But if Watson comes back and looks the same as he has for the past several years, inconsistent, limited in mobility, making the kind of decisions that lead to 7-on-7 interceptions, then Monken is going to have to answer for every single thing he said in that media availability. Every compliment, every cool, every narrative-changing speech is going to be replayed against the backdrop of a quarterback who couldn't deliver. And that is a position no offensive coordinator wants to be in, 6 games into the season. Dre's personal opinion. Here is my honest read on what Todd Monken is actually doing, because I don't think any of this is accidental, and I don't think Monken is naive. I think there are 2 parallel games being played simultaneously. Game 1 is the locker room game. Monken is putting Watson on record publicly as someone who has been believed in, someone who has been praised, someone who has been given the benefit of the doubt by his own coaching staff. That creates accountability. When your coach has publicly staked his credibility on you being capable, you carry that into every snap. You can't hide from it. Game 2 is the fan management game. Cleveland Browns fans have been through an absolutely brutal stretch of quarterback instability. They need to believe. Monken is giving them something to believe in before the season starts. Whether or not Watson can back it up is a question September will answer. But going into OTAs with the offensive coordinator on record saying this thing can work, that buys goodwill and patience that a team rebuilding its identity desperately needs. The Speakeasy crew also raised something that doesn't get talked about enough in mainstream coverage, which is the organizational dysfunction that surrounded Watson during the Stefanski era. We all watched it unfold in real time, and it was genuinely baffling from the outside. Nobody knew who the starter was from week to week. Watson was not getting consistent reps when he was healthy enough to practice. Joe Flacco got traded directly into the division, which is an organizational message so loud it was almost disrespectful to the guy whose locker it was. The front office and coaching staff appeared to be operating without a coherent philosophy around their own franchise quarterback, and that incoherence trickles down into every level of a team's culture. Quarterbacks play differently when they know their coaches believe in them. This is not psychology speculation. This is documented throughout the history of the position. The confidence that comes from organizational clarity, from a coordinator who designs the offense around your strengths rather than around your limitations, from a head coaching structure that names you the starter and means it, that confidence produces measurably better football. What Watson experienced under Stefanski in his worst stretches was the opposite of that. He was operating in an environment of institutional doubt, and institutional doubt is corrosive. What Monken is building now is structurally the opposite of that. He is communicating belief. He is communicating clarity. He is communicating that he has a plan and that Watson is at the center of it. Whether Watson can physically execute on that plan, given where his body is in the recovery process, is still the central unknown. But the environment being created around him is dramatically more functional than what existed before, and that matters more than the skeptics want to admit. The Speakeasy guys landed on an important observation when they pointed out that when someone has all the money in the world and their check is already coming regardless, there are plenty of players who stop caring, who stop putting in the work that doesn't show up on film, who coast on reputation and contract, and let the urgency drain away. By all accounts coming out of Cleveland, Deshaun Watson is not doing that. He is showing up. He is working. He is giving Monken something to work with on a human level that Monken did not necessarily expect to find. And that reciprocal dynamic, Watson impressing Monken off the field, Monken responding by building offensive packages that put Watson in position to succeed on the field, is the foundation of something that could actually work. Monken said something that reveals the core of this relationship, when he noted that whatever happened before he arrived in Cleveland has nothing to do with the Deshaun Watson he met when he walked into that building. He wasn't there for the suspensions. He wasn't there for the Achilles. He wasn't there for Stefanski's press conferences and the Flacco trade and the organizational chaos. He met the man who showed up every day this spring, And by his account, that man is worth believing in. That is either the most important thing that could be said about this Browns season, or it is going to age very badly by October. There is genuinely no middle ground here. The Deshaun Watson situation in Cleveland has always been all or nothing, and it still is. Todd Monken has now publicly planted his flag on the all side of that equation. The season will render its verdict. But let's bring this back to the big picture of what Cleveland is actually building at the skill positions, because the wide receiver situation and the quarterback situation are not separate stories. They are the same story told from different angles. Todd Monken is constructing an offense. He has drafted Conceição to be a long-term cornerstone. He has added Boston as a big-bodied complement. He has discovered in Isaiah Bond a vertical threat with custom package potential. And he is trying to tie all of that together behind a quarterback who, at his best, was a legitimate top 5 player in this league, and who, at his current realistic ceiling, needs to be efficient and smart rather than spectacular. That combination, smart quarterback, diversified receiver weapons, a creative coordinator who designs the system around his personnel rather than forcing his personnel to conform to a preset system, is actually a formula that works in today's NFL. It is not a guarantee. Nothing in football is a guarantee, but it is a coherent plan with a coherent identity, and after years of watching Cleveland spin its wheels without either of those things, it is at minimum something to watch with genuine curiosity. The pressure on every single person in that building is enormous. Watson knows it, Conceição and Boston know it, and Jeudy, sitting at WR4, on a depth chart that was supposed to have him as a featured piece, knows it in a different and more personal way than anyone else on that roster. This Cleveland Browns OTA story is only going to get louder as we get closer to training camp, and Dre Reports is going to be here every single step of the way, covering every twist, every depth chart move, every Monken soundbite, and every Deshaun Watson development. Without filters and without apology. This is what we do. Now look, if you made it to the end of this video, you already know what time it is. Smash that like button right now, and I mean right now, not after you finish scrolling. Leave me a comment below telling me what you actually believe. Is Todd Monken a genius who is going to resurrect Deshaun Watson's career? Or is he setting himself and Cleveland up for the most predictable disappointment in NFL history? I want the unfiltered takes down there. Subscribe to Dre Fiverr and hit that bell notification, because if you're not subscribed, you are going to miss the moment this thing either blows up into something beautiful or falls completely apart. And either way, I'm going to be here to cover it live. No filter, no sugarcoating, just the truth. Dre Reports. Let's go.